every case that you deal with should be about racial justice. Even if everybody in your courtroom, if you're white, old white guy like me, and everybody else in the courtroom is an old white guy, even the defendant on the speeding case, you still have to figure out, am I treating this person the same way I would somebody who was younger, different age, or different ethnicity, different race? You have to constantly do that. So as what can you control? Well, number one, you can check your bias. How many have been through applied bias training? If you haven't, make sure you do it. It's very valuable.
In accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, this court.
Sarah Burse was Angel's friend. She's one of several people calling on local authorities to pursue an alternative to traditional prosecution.
I know Jen believed that we need to address harm and create accountability that is really rooted in looking at the root causes of why harm happens.
Burse says Angel strongly disagreed with the current criminal justice system and would not want her alleged killer to go to prison.
Like locking somebody in a cage, is that really going to bring Jen back?
Instead, Burse says Angel would have liked a form of restorative justice to happen. Friends of Angels have been working alongside the nonprofit Restore Oakland.
If you're not aware, another woman was burned alive on the subway, this time in Chicago, by the name of Bethany McGee. A white woman, by the way, burned alive by a Negro male. Now, apparently, she's still alive, unlike the white woman who was burned alive by a Guatemalan illegal who burned her to death in New York. And I just want to use this video as yet another opportunity to talk about why this is becoming a normal crime. The crime of burning women alive, and specifically white women. And I highlight that also to show you once again this pathetic myth of white supremacy. Because, I don't think white supremacy would allow their white women to be getting burned alive and assaulted by POC thugs. But anyway, the main people responsible for this activity outside of the criminal themselves are these criminal judges that need to be all impeached and need to be arrested. And next to them, believe it or not, it's women. Women and feminism in general are the main advocates for these soft on crime policies, wanting to ignore race realism and wanting to encourage this idea that if you actually protect the innocent people within your society, that you're a fascist. Because as much as it may be uncomfortable to say it, this man who was, by the way, arrested 72 times before he met this woman and burned her alive, it may be uncomfortable to say, but the fact of the matter is, more than likely, this woman that he tried to burn alive to death advocates for POC thugs, scumbags like this in the name of Black Lives Matter. The fact that she's a young 26-year-old white woman living in a blue state, the odds are very high that she would look at punishing criminals as racist, fascist, Nazi behavior. So as much as she does deserve sympathy due to the pain that she suffered and will continue to suffer for the rest of her life, it's also necessary to acknowledge that these be the main type of idiots advocating for these people to be on the streets. Now, countries like El Salvador, Indonesia, Singapore, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, they have showed you what you should do to criminals. And we know what should be done. The death penalty should be in overdrive right now. But because of the leniency, the defense, the protection for the worst of the worst, people feel emboldened enough to commit the crimes that they do. And again, especially with this Negro male burning this white woman alive. Because I'm sure his entire life, all he's heard is that white people are to blame for everything. That's why it's very dangerous to promote that concept, because you're pretty much encouraging and rationalizing people attacking others based on so-called race, especially when you're propping them up as being rulers of this nation, oppressors of the world through colonization and slavery and systematic this and that. And so that's why it's fair to assume whenever it's a black on white crime especially, it's always a hate crime. Because the soundtrack of Negroes' lives is hearing that black or that white people are to blame for everything. Now, again, this is why I don't give two shits about conversations involving Epstein or Israel. Because while all of those idiot conversations are happening, this demented evil is happening on a daily in these streets. People need to be talking about these judges as much as they're talking about Epstein. People need to be talking about this judicial system, this criminal judicial system that enables these criminals as much as they're talking about Israel. Something tangible, something relevant, something that we can directly point to with first and last names and addresses. Because as much as people were cheerleading Luigi for eliminating healthcare workers, where are the Marios for these evil judges that literally say out of their own mouths that they are being lenient towards criminals based on so-called race? And it's not based on them being white. It's based on them being colored people. Now, this is a reality that endangers us all. But in this particular instance, it was a white woman that it endangered. And quite frankly, they're going to be the most at risk, one, because they're women and because they're white, and they're seen as being a part of the other side of this race war, which, quite frankly, most so-called white people don't even comprehend that they're involved in. I mean, because again, a lot of the woke white libtards are cheerleaders for people that are actively engaged in a war against them. That's how retarded they are, which is why I call them libtards. It is also why I also describe them as obliviously suicidal. Because whenever they're talking about the man or talking about the system, even though they may be thinking about, from the liberal whites perspective, they may be thinking about government or billionaires or maybe even millionaires. But when other races of people are talking about the man in the system, they're thinking about white people. And it doesn't matter how much you pander or how much of a self-proclaimed ally you are, you're their target. And the reason why it's relevant to someone like myself who isn't so-called white to highlight this fact is because, quite frankly, if so-called white people are no longer, in majority control of these Western civilizations, then Western civilization will fall. Because it's very unfortunate for me to say as a Negro myself, but I don't see Negroes properly running a Western nation. I've already seen them and bear witness to their activities as mayors and governors and local politicians, and they're horrible. Because they got that same sense of entitlement and victimhood as a bum Negro that don't have a job or any money. The mentality exists no matter where most Negroes go. And quite frankly, it wouldn't be American Negroes to take over if Whitey fell or if the Jews fell. The next people in line would most likely be the Chinese or the Arabs. And they have none of that white guilt bullshit. And they will be brutal, to say the least. But anyway, just another very unfortunate, easily avoidable situation. And these types of criminality has been happening for decades, by the way, courtesy of these liberal judges. Decades. And there's so many lives lost and families that have suffered needlessly. But guess what? These judges can point to tens of millions of Americans that advocate for this bullshit by giving the excuse of racism or mental health crisis. That's another thing that they all throw in to defend the worst of the worst. So it's a lot of everyday citizens' fault for the thugs and savages that are out here and allowed to roam the streets to maim, harass, and kill.